Okay, so there are obviously a large number of languages in Italy, as James was showing. This is showing them in a slightly different form, just to show how they are related or not related to each other. So obviously we have the Italic branch with Latin and Faliscan, and also the Sibelian languages, which you'll be hearing a lot more about in the next hour, I guarantee. So Oscan and Umbrian, obviously the ones we know the most about. There are some other ones as well. There's lots of smaller ones I've not put on there at all. And then also in Indo-European, we also have Greek, and we also have Mesapic. Yeah, I should say I've limited this to sort of central and southern Italy, which is my main sort of area of interest. There are also other things right in the north of Italy as well. And then a non-Indo-European language, obviously we have Etruscan, but things are not arranged in Italy in such a way that everyone is always next to the people whose languages are most closely related to their own. Of course, this is the newer version of the Wikipedia picture that does not have the elevation data on it, but there you go. Yeah, so I couldn't get the same one as James, obviously. And yes, but it's basically the exact same picture, so shows the extent of all these languages. You can see that Greek is tending to go around the coast in the south, and therefore is in contact with more than one other language. Etruscan, at its largest extent, also came much further south, down into Campania, so was also in contact with Latin and Oscan and Greek and so on. And yeah, this is obviously misleading, as James was saying, because it implies these clear boundaries, which we don't have. This is not a sort of massive swathe of Greek around the edges. It's basically much more mixed up than that. You obviously have sites that are primarily Greek-speaking and other ones that are primarily Oscan-speaking mixed up next to each other. Also, sites can obviously change hands, so they may start as sort of writing Greek and then writing Oscan and then writing Latin or whatever it is. How closely the written material reflects the languages that they were speaking is obviously another question. So yes, bad but perhaps slightly helpful map. And the area that I was particularly interested in during my PhD, well, the group of texts that I was interested in was South Oscan. So these are texts written in the Oscan language but using the Greek alphabet, and they are found mainly in the south of Italy, in Lucania and Bruttium and Messana. So basically what's marked there is Augustan Region 3, which is basically the same thing, plus Messana. That's modern Basilicata, Calabria and Messina. And a few of the major sites are marked here, partly just to show how close we are to mainland Greece if we're talking about the very south of Italy as well. When I made this picture, one of my friends said, "Oh, have you just superimposed a map of Italy and Greece to show how big they are next to each other?" No, they actually are that close to each other. The way we look at things doesn't always reflect that, but if we're right down in the south, we are sort of as close to Greece as we are to northern Italy. And the South Oscan inscriptions are found from about 400 to about 100 BC, or slightly later than 100. And here is a map showing all their find spots. As you can see, a lot of them are kind of round the coastline, so near to Greek sites or in sites that were previously Greek-speaking, but also quite a number of them are up in the interior of Lucania, up in the mountains where Greeks don't bother to go, as far as I can tell. So there aren't any Greek sites up there, but some of our most important South Oscan sites are up there. Probably the most important of which is Rossano di Vaglio, which gives us about 50 inscriptions out of around 130, so quite a big proportion, and you'll see some of those as we go along as well. So one of the most fundamental reasons, I suppose, that we know there was contact between South Oscan and Greek is the fact that it's written in an alphabet based on the Greek alphabet. So these are a few examples from different periods and showing slightly different letter forms, all from Rossano di Vaglio. And you can see immediately, particularly in the clearer ones, that it is a alphabet based on the Greek alphabet. We do have to have one or two extra characters, so there's no letter F in Greek, but we need one in Oscan. So here are two of them just circled in red. Hope that's clear enough. and they tend to have a sort of S shape, sometimes one direction, sometimes the other, sometimes more curvy, sometimes more angular, but they're often that kind of thing. And we can see straight away, we start to suspect that there's not just sort of one point of contact between Greek and Oscan in terms of the alphabet. It's not just one guy talking to another guy and then he goes and runs with it and they never speak to each other again, because some of the changes that we see over time in the South Oscan alphabet kind of mirror or go in parallel with changes we see in the Greek alphabet. There's various examples of this, but some letter shapes you might be familiar with. So we have 4-bar sigmas in Oscan texts, and then perhaps later, or perhaps not, perhaps around the same time, we have lunate sigmas. They can coexist in one inscription. It's not that they're brilliant for dating, but they are different letter forms that are all familiar from Greek inscriptions of Italy as well. So the details of this diagram are not hugely important, but the overall point is, if our ultimate aim is the South Oscan alphabet, and its main basis is the Greek Ionic alphabet plus F, there's actually quite a lot of inputs into it at different points in time that end up with the alphabet that South Oscan uses, and which itself changes over time. So not just the Greek Ionic alphabet, but also the Central Oscan alphabet, so another alphabet that's used to write Oscan, which is ultimately based on the Etruscan alphabet, and also seems to have some input from other Greek alphabets possibly as well. And all of those kind of go into the mix. We also have evidence of contact in other ways. So sometimes we seem to have people from very similar sites or neighbouring sites choosing to write in Oscan or choosing to write in Greek for what would seem to be very similar situations. So this is one example. These are both from, well, the dating on these things is often quite loose, but they're from, not a million miles apart time-wise. This one on the right, maybe your left, maybe a little bit later in the 4th century. And they both commemorate walls being built, city walls, and they give the name of the magistrate who built them, except that Potentia 39 is written in Greek, so epites numelu arches, so the guy's called Numelos, which is kind of like an Oscan name, but given a Greek ending. And also, Oscan names are like Latin names. You normally have a first name and a last name, but this guy's reduced it to one name, which is more a Greek kind of thing. Whereas the other guy is a bit harder to read, but he says, mais aries suen medicen, so mais aries in his medicship, which is a type of magistracy. And these are neighbouring sites. Both of them are quite far inland in Lucania. They're not near other Greeks, not near Greek sites or anything like that. But one magistrate perhaps has made a choice to use Greek and another hasn't. Perhaps there's some, reason behind that we're not sure of. So this was one of the things I started to look at. We have other examples as well. So if you're dedicating your armour, as you do, of course, this guy, now he does have two names, Noios Banios, but that os ending is really a Greek ending, not an Oscan one. If you were to write that in Oscan, you would write ies, ies, instead of eos. And this other chap has written his name in Oscan, although still in the Greek alphabet. This is quite nice actually, because he writes it right to left as well, so maybe influenced by another alphabet that's written right to left, rather than the Greek alphabet, which by this time is written left to right. Another kind of layer to this is obviously choosing between Oscan and Latin. So there's this form of grave monument that sort of arises in around the 2nd century BC, perhaps in Campania or somewhere like that, but that then does spread to Rome and is very popular there from then on. These guys pick up on this. They want to use this type of funerary monument. Oscan speakers don't have a kind of long-standing tradition of having marked graves, and so writing on funerary monuments is something that's quite rare. But this is quite a late one from Tegianum. So they're both from Tegianum. They're both from basically the same date. This guy nearest me has had his name written in Latin. The other guy's in South Oscan. So that ies ending on the end, we can tell that's Oscan rather than Greek. Though of course, if it's written in the South Oscan alphabet is perfectly legible to someone who could also read Greek. So there's perhaps almost another layer there of it being legible to Oscan speakers and Greek speakers and Romans who could read the Greek alphabet, whereas this guy is just going for Latin. I mean, he's limiting himself hugely. So there's all these things where, particularly in this situation, where you seem to have two very similar monuments from the same place at the same date, which suggest extensive bilingualism. Doesn't prove it, of course. They're different guys. They could have never spoken to each other in their lives and just been totally monolingual speakers. But we start to suspect that there was Greek-Oscan contact and Greek-Oscan bilingualism. We have other things that suggest that as well. So other evidence of language contact that we might find include borrowing and code switching, stuff like that. So this is one possible example, although when I showed this slide, Nick was like, that's a bad example. That doesn't work at all. But we have this sequence in this inscription of Khomoi. We don't normally get KH in Oscan. We don't have aspirated consonants. We don't need that kind of sequence. So potentially it's a loanword from Greek, perhaps korma, like burial mound or something like that. The inscription is quite broken, which rather hampers us trying to understand what they're talking about. But that's a possibility. This is another one, which is a curse tablet. The first three columns I've not transliterated because they're a list of names. But the fourth one starts with a list of names and then has this rather nice formula at the end, which starts in Oscan and then code switches into Greek. And the Greek portion is matches up really well with some other Greek curse tablets that we find, particularly in Sicily. So idiosyncratically written Greek, but recognisably Greek. So perhaps the guy who wrote it had access to some sort of book of magical spells that was in Greek, or he was familiar with it in some other way, or because of the nature of kind of curse tablets, wanted to make something that was mixed and like more confusing to make the spell kind of stronger, or all of the above. All of those things could be going on at the same time. Also in curse tablets we have this quite interesting one. Again, I've just given a transliteration of this bottom portion here because it's all basically the same. It's a list of names, and they are Oscan type names, and also the Oscan word medex, which is magistrate. And instead of having the M on the end, which we would expect as an accusative in Oscan, it has an N instead, which seems to be from Greek. So there's two ways of looking at this, or many ways probably, but you can either think this is intended as an Oscan text but with Greek elements kind of code switched in or borrowed in, or you can say it is a Greek text but all these people happen to have Oscan style names, and also the word medex has been borrowed into the local variety of Greek. Whichever of those you think is true is still good evidence for bilingualism between those two languages. We also have quite a few examples of reuse. I've just chosen one, which I like because the Greek is upside down. And so what seems to have happened is you start writing your Greek, and then you go, oh no, never mind. And they leave it for some unspecified period of time. Could have been ages, I suppose. But then you need to use that bit of stone, so you turn it the other way up. What's rather nice about it is that both of the texts seem to start with in the priesthood. And so the Oscan text we get in the priesthood of this guy. Pactias or Ruptes or whatever his name is. And it seems that the Greek might start with similar sort of content. So maybe they were, the two texts are quite far apart in time, but maybe not. Who knows? So again, that's quite a nice example of two languages being used at the same site. So what I ended up doing was putting all of this information on a big table. The detail is not terribly important here at all, but I thought I should give a key to the colours, otherwise people would ask and I wouldn't remember what was what. But what we don't find really is that we get, this is sort of visual representation of all the different types of possible evidence for language contact with Greek that we find in South Oscan texts. And what we don't find, which possibly we might expect, we don't find that that evidence is more common in the coastal sites or around the edges. And you might say, well, the ones who are living closest to Greek-speaking people would definitely use the most Greek in their writing. That doesn't seem to be what's going on. What seems to be happening basically is the sites with the most texts give us the most evidence of contact. So Rossano de Valio up there in the middle, loads of possible examples, but that's because it gives us many more text than other sites. It's not quite as simple as that though, because some sites are slightly overrepresented or underrepresented, but this is because of the type of text they give us, not necessarily because of their location or the time period when the text come from. So what seems to happen is that some types of text give us more evidence of Greek contact than others. In a way, this is not hugely surprising. We know that curse tablets might have lots of Greek elements in them. Dedicatory texts also have quite a lot, but it doesn't always play out in the way you think. So legal texts have very, very little in the way of Greek influence. So you might think, all right, it's a public and personal thing. Public texts have very little, whereas personal texts have much more, or something like that. But actually, other types of official texts have plenty of evidence of borrowing from Greek, interference with Greek, stuff like that. Legal texts seem to be slightly special in this way, although our evidence is quite limited, I should say. And I've not shown any of these type of texts already, but there also may be an association of Greek with high-quality goods, with artists' signatures on pottery and art and things like that. So, how do we model language contact in these small corpora? Well, fortunately, Alex Mullen, who's in the room, has provided a very good model in the form of the blue sort of upper half of this table. Again, a lot of information here. Where it says ELV, that's ethno-linguistic vitality, which I just could not get to fit, strangely enough, on the slide. And ethno-linguistic vitality is a phrase I think actually first used in Alex and Patrick James's book in 2012 in the realm of classics. It's been used in linguistics for much longer. And it's a sort of umbrella term for how well a language is doing, how likely it is to survive, how likely it is to be maintained for various social reasons. And so if what we're interested in is contact, we're looking at kind of this half, and there's different ways in which evidence of contact might appear depending on the relative ethno-linguistic vitality of the two languages that you're looking at. So if they're both well regarded, both doing well, borrowing may happen in both directions. If one is of higher status, we might say, and one of lower status in general, then the higher status language will normally turn up in the lower status language, not the other way around. I've added something here kind of provisionally, that this kind of evidence might also be constrained by what type of evidence survives. So in whatever community you're in, there might be different norms about when you include borrowings from another language or not. So, for example, in some other areas where it says at the top, bi-version text may be common. Often, well, not often, but many of these are gravestones. In Oscan, we don't really get any gravestones, therefore we don't get very many bi-version texts at all. So perhaps survival of texts and the genres of text that survive are going to affect the kind of evidence that we have, and so perhaps we can take that into account as well. So that is something I've kind of suggested in my PhD thesis. So key themes that have come out of my work so far, partly to do with the alphabet, so there's not necessarily one single point of transmission of the Greek alphabet to South Oscan. There are genre-based differences, or there seem to be, in how much Greek borrowing or Greek influence is found in written text, and that applies to Latin as well in South Oscan. That's something I've dealt with much less, but it seems to follow a similar kind of principle. And we've seen already that there is an element of personal choice. Perhaps a magistrate can set up his inscription in Greek or not in Greek or whatever, but perhaps there is a kind of framework of norms that personal choice is working within. So that may vary depending on the community that you're in, when you are, where you are, and so on. But also, very importantly, varies with the type of text you're trying to write. You're not going to borrow as many Greek words in one type of text as in another. What I've looked at is South Oscan specifically, where curses have lots of Greek borrowing and legal texts have almost none. In another community, it could be the reverse. It could be the other way around. You have your own norms for where borrowing and interference might turn up, and where you feel it's appropriate to use elements from another language. So obviously a lot of questions remain out of this, often centering around the fact that South Oscan is not the only alphabet or the only language in Italy, let alone in the ancient world. So how does the Greek alphabet interact with other alphabets of Italy and other languages of Italy? So I'm particularly interested actually in other languages that also habitually use the Greek alphabet, so languages like Massapic in the heel of Italy. And how do we add Latin into this picture? So especially when there's going to be quite a complicated three-way relationship perhaps between Oscan and Greek and Latin in the south, and how do those things act together in Oscan or in other languages? And how does the linguistic influence match up with influence on material culture? So this is something I've really barely started on, but want to do much more of. So in Rossano, for example, miles away from any Greek sites, but with plenty of evidence of Greek influence on the language, is that also true of the material culture? Is that site actually full of Greek influence on its art and its building and so on, or is it perceptibly less Greek in some way than a site on the coast? I don't really know the answer to that. I would like to. So that is sort of where I've been and where I'm going. I'm also taking on a kind of webmaster role for the project, and I noticed actually James didn't give you the address of the website. So if you would like to keep up with what we're doing, this would be the way to do it. We're hoping to maybe put on something deriving from this in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, and we write about other things we're interested in, stuff we're going to be doing, other events we'll be doing. If you are of the Twitter sort of inclination, that is where you can find us as well. Thank you very much.